Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so you won't miss a new episode. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted to have a conversation with Mike Lipkin. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Mike, allow me to introduce you to the audience, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of things what I've picked up. You are an experienced senior trader on Wall Street. You're also an academic in both chemistry and math. And you also are a bridge player, no national championship yet, but over 100 of regional first and second. So a lot to cover. We're going to talk about science, trading, and bridge.
Okay.
Yeah. And that actually, when I wrote that down, I immediately had to look at my cupboard and realize I still have a book of Gödel, Escher, Bach, which was a very famous book which was published in 1979. I don't know if you're familiar with that book about cognition.
I'm familiar with the book, but I haven't read it. Strangely enough, I was a big fan of Richard Hofstadter, his uncle, and read many of his books.
Okay. Well, it brings together mathematics, symmetry, intelligence, and I was thinking about that. So what's the common element in science, trading, and bridge? That's something I want to explore. But I want to start out with the beginning, because if I understand correctly, your first career was becoming an academic and going to MIT, where you graduated.
That was my undergraduate. Yeah.
But you already went to MIT when you were still at college, if I remember correctly.
Wait, I'm sorry, you've confused me. MIT was my college.
Yeah, no, I know. But you already went to MIT during high school, I understand. So you became
No. May I just correct a few things? So I went to MIT as my undergraduate, and you're probably referring to the fact that I didn't do a senior year in high school.
Yeah.
And that was purely because of the fact that my parents lived in a suburb, and the school there wasn't able to accommodate students who were already through all the science and math in the curriculum. So it made sense to apply early.
Okay, got that. If the school couldn't educate you anymore, you were finished. What did you get bored?
No, not at all. I mean, there were a lot of really nice classes in non-science and math, but since I really wanted to spend more effort in that area, I decided to apply to college, because I would have basically been doing independent study for half of my senior year in high school, and it made more sense to try to do that at a college. That's all.
So how did the kids around you from the high school react to that?
Oh, no, someone had done the same thing a year earlier. In fact,
Okay.
I was sort of perplexed about what to do until I realized that, someone had been in the same boat, and he had
so that was the
left
example.
earlier. Also, because the high school was not a very large high school, there were some years when there were many advanced placement classes in the sciences, but so happened the class that I belonged to was more literature focused, and so it would have been a little bit difficult for me. That's all.
Okay. Now, if you go to MIT math, can you, in hindsight, share with us what was your goal? Were you able to look beyond the math class? Where did you see yourself ending up with?
I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I did like math a lot. So I majored in mathematics and actually majoring in mathematics at that time, I'm not sure if things have changed, was actually quite comfortable. I took a lot of classes in physics and in philosophy and so forth because the time necessary to devote to the math classes per se left me room to take extra classes. So,
And is
um,
that the reason when, because you did not do your PhD in math, but in chemistry?
well, I double majored in math and chemistry, and then
Okay.
I applied to chemistry grad schools and
Okay.
um, went did
Uh,
that, and then went on from there. Did a postdoc or two postdocs rather at Cornell afterwards.
okay. So, uh, after all the education, did you immediately start to become a teacher, or was there a gap before you had that position?
Well, actually, I never well when I was at Cornell and I was doing a postdoc, I was approached by the some people there and asked if I would be willing to TA a class in statistical mechanics that was being offered jointly for the chemistry and the physics grad students, and I said sure. And they were a little concerned that people who were in chemistry might not have you know, the physics background that would be needed for the course in statistical mechanics. And so they wanted to make sure there was someone like me, you know, who was there to help people. But they were quite competent. They had no problems. But I liked teaching a lot, and I ended up transitioning into being an instructor in the physics department there. That
Okay.
was many years ago.
So, what's appealing to about teaching for you?
Well, it's sort of fun because the you know, you have a chance to challenge some young minds and also to you know, give a perspective. Of course, when you're teaching, you're not necessarily supervising research at the level of an instructor. You're teaching sort of the canon.
Mhm.
So it really is it's a chance to help people maybe see things in a way that'll make learning the material easier.
Got it. So, how do you then transition from um, the academic community to Wall Street? How did that happen?
Uh, are we allowed to discuss politics at all in this conversation?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right, so politics reared its ugly hand. I was really happy earning very little money and being an instructor in the physics department at Cornell. And Ronald Reagan cut the budget for science. And so the chairman of the department came to me and said, I'm really sorry we won't have funds for you for next year. Um, and this is where playing bridge came in handy because I was at a bridge tournament and someone said, well, why don't you come and trade options for us? And although I did not go to work for that person, you know, it
Uh,
sort of pointed me in a direction.
Okay, so good example of serendipity.
Um, well, it was serendipitous, but I will say that it would have been in my mind anyway without that person suggesting it because um, a large part of my group of friends at the time outside of science
Yeah.
and math were bridge players,
Okay,
tournament
they were
bridge players.
bridge players, but and we'll cover bridge a little bit later because that's fascinating. But I just wanted to explore becoming a trader.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so, uh, well, it's impossible to separate that from the bridge.
Okay.
So, what happened? What happened when options were? Of course, um, options are not new to the Netherlands. They go back to the tulip
Yeah. True. Yeah.
bubble. But options as a listed product on the stock exchanges in the United States was actually quite new. In fact, when they first were introduced, there were only calls, and they added puts later. This was before me, but the reason why they're inextricable, bridge and trading, is because um, there were a lot of extremely good bridge players. We're talking about people who are national world class. So a lot of your audience probably are not familiar with people like that. However, they might have heard of people like Gary Kasparov in chess, or Magnus Carlsen in chess. So we're talking about people in bridge who are at that kind of level, and they would make money by being hired by wealthy people to play with them. And it turned out that some of the most eager bridge players, sorry, most eager uh, client bridge players, people who would hire these very best bridge players to play with them, were the management of Bear Stearns.
Aha.
So what happened was they went to people that, for the few in your audience who might know about American tournament bridge players, they went to people like Ronnie Rubin and others, David Berkowitz, and so on, and they suggested, well, why don't you come and trade options and then play with us, because that's a 9:30 to 4 job, so you get done, you have a lot of time to play bridge. So what happened was, by the early 80s, there was an enormous group of bridge players who were on Wall Street, but specifically in the area of option trading. And in fact, um, they were collected, and they cleared Bear Stearns as a clearing firm, and they were collected in what was called the Bridge Group. And so if you didn't want to discuss options, you could discuss compound squeezes or bidding theory and so on. And so playing in tournaments, I couldn't help but run into many, many friends who were on Wall Street trading options.
Okay. Now,
And yeah,
oh,
sorry.
no, 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 that's fine. I just fascinating to see. I wasn't aware how strong that link was, but how did you? Because you are an accomplished bridge player, as introduced, a lot of regional first and seconds. Um, when did you start to learn bridge? Was that already on the table as an academic, or did you have to learn that as well?
No, I learned that as a little kid.
Okay.
So my mother was an eager bridge player, as many people in mid-century were. I mean, bridge was so popular that there was a challenge match played at Madison Square Garden in the 1930s. Um, the people would find that hard to believe now, because the reason for bridge's popularity was at a time when travel was incredibly difficult. If you took a vacation to another town or to a resort, that usually entailed, taking off a month in the summer, because it probably took you multiple days just to get anywhere. There wasn't a road system, and it was a big deal. So people played bridge socially. There were you would ask one couple would ask another couple over for dinner, and bridge, and so on. So it was very, very popular. And my mother, who came to this country in the middle of the century, she was an eager bridge player, and she played with her friends. And she sort of was hoping that my father and my sister, we happen to have exactly four, would take to it.
Yeah.
So she, taught us bridge, but it was just I was the only one of the other group that liked it, took to it.
No. I
but I
would
was very
assume,
young.
so I would assume that your mother taught you to play bridge just for the social aspect as a family. Did she ever envision what it could have what it led up to in your case?
Oh no, not at all. Because, I mean, the idea that there would be this connection between bridge and finances was completely, impossible to foresee. But I will tell you this, that although the large bulk of people who were doing options trading at the time were bridge players when I started, there were exceptional players of other games. So there were three grandmasters on the floor of the American Stock Exchange when I started, one of whom had been the second for Anatoly Karpov in his match with Kasparov, his second match. There were people who were ranked in the top 10 in the world in backgammon. There were people who were exceptionally good at poker, and there were many, many people who made money as blackjack counters.
But
And what I came to understand being on the floor is that the particular skill set one needed for options trading was much more games playing than it was anything else. In fact, if blind, I were hiring people to trade options, and you gave me someone who was an MBA on one hand, and you gave me someone who's an expert games player on the other, but you didn't tell me I couldn't examine them or interview them or anything like that, I would take the games player hands down, because the skill set involved. Now, remember, this was well before there were computers everywhere. So someone would walk into a crowd and ask for a market, and he'd have to get it immediately. And of course, he would never take your offer or sell on your bid. He would perhaps, be in between, and you'd have to make a quick decision.
yeah,
And the hallmark of good games players is not actually calculating, but guesstimating the relative values of things at high speed.
and when
So,
you, because you also mentioned you like to teach, would you in your classes then also stimulate younger people to, okay, not only learn the theory, but also just play a game, learn chess, learn bridge, learn backgammon? Because
oh,
of,
oh no, because if when I was an instructor, for example, at Cornell, the class would be, statistical physics, or it would be
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah,
So,
in that
no.
case, it's okay. Okay, it may not apply for statistical physics, but okay, let's
Okay.
put it more general. Because if you're in trading, it does apply. Would you advise young people starting their career to play games,
Oh,
build up skills?
I can't answer that because I'm a dinosaur. I really don't know a couple of things. I'm not trying to evade your question. So um, after well, I should tell you because you didn't ask me about it, but um, while I was trading, trading was okay, and I was playing tournament bridge, but I also wanted to get involved with uh, the mathematics of pricing models and so forth. And so fortunately, I'm not a shy person, and I just sort of wandered into NYU and made friendship with a brilliant mathematician named Marco Avellaneda. He's no longer alive, but he was spectacularly brilliant. And I had a couple models, one on an effect that happens in stocks that have options, which is called stock pinning, and one on the pricing of hard to borrows. And I sort of wrote out the models, but I didn't know how to solve them. All well, the second one. In the first case, I wrote out half the model or most of it, and Marco added a very important point, and then he solved the math for the most part, and we had two very nice papers and several others. And so that was a lot of fun. And subsequently, I taught for, let's see, I just want to be approximately accurate. I think it was 11 years at Columbia in the IEOR department and around 4 years at NYU's Tandon facility in their equivalent, which is called financial engineering. And I taught a course called event-driven finance. So I sort of carried the discussion with you away from bridge to event-driven finance because that's really what I've taught over the last 15 years and what you know what I there other things come into play, not bridge.
Okay. I am going to come back to Bridge briefly
Okay.
because you wrote a book on this, Invitation to Annihilation. That is quite a strong title.
Mhm.
Why that title to begin with? And what does the book tell you?
Well, that book is not so much an instruction book for beginners or anyone like that. It's sort of somewhat whimsical, but the reason for the title is because the topic of the book is how to organize your play so that your opponents make more mistakes. And the reason for that, again, without getting into too much detail about bridge playing, especially for people who'd be completely bored by it. Um, in the game of bridge, there is you start out with maximal uncertainty of who has what and which cards are in which hands and so forth. And in the course of time, of course, ultimately you describe more and more of the hands, and then you play the hand, and eventually everything is known. So in the course of uh, exposing more and more information, the play of your opponent should get better and better and better because there's only so much uncertainty left. So basically, what this book was a way of maximizing the uncertainty your opponents have at any point in time, so that they're likely to make a mistake. Now, it may not be a technical mistake, but it may be a mistake for the hand. In other words, if you keep them in the dark as much as possible, they might make a reasonable play that turns out to be a fatal error.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, so,
It
so
reminds me
that's
of
why the title.
the small story of two people walking in the desert and they come across a lion and one
Mhm.
puts on the running shoes and the other says, well, why bother? Because the lion's always going to run faster than you are. So, well, but it will allow me to run faster than you. That
Right.
reminds
Yeah.
me. Is that what it's a little bit about?
Um, no, there's not a third party, but yes,
Okay.
it's actually no, it's more like how can I put it? By the way, those four paintings in
Yeah.
the background are actually by the artist who illustrated the book. That was unintended. It just happens to be
Okay.
they're hanging behind me.
Okay.
Um, no, what happens in Bridge is incomplete information, and so you can do things that make your opponents more likely to make an error. So it's not so much a race as you make a play and they make a play, you make a play and they make a play and so on. And
Uh,
uh,
okay.
anyway,
Can you translate this into a business scenario where also you are competing? There is not all the facts are known.
um, yeah, well, typically when we were trading options, now I want to remind the your audience that I left the floor, maybe around 2000 and 15 or so. So this is over a decade ago. But when we were trading options, um, we would have more information than other people. So let me explain that. Not illegal information, but for example, if someone came in and bid for 1,000 contracts. They might not buy the whole 1,000 contracts. So they may buy, a couple hundred, and the price of the option they want to buy has gone up. Okay. But presumably they're still interested in buying those contracts, which means that the relative value of that and other related contracts have changed. But the general public may not be aware of that. So, for example, now I'll say something which may be confusing to some people, may be elucidating to others, but I'll try to then explain it. Let's say that there are April 30 options in this product, and there are also May 30 options in this product. Well, someone may come in to try to buy 1,000 April 30 contracts, and you sell them some and raise the price. And at the same time, someone completely unaware of that order flow will try to sell the May 30 contracts. And while there's not a perfect correlation between what the May 30 contracts should be worth and the April 30 contracts, the fact that someone wants to buy the April 30 contracts makes the May 30 contracts more valuable. So that person who's coming in to sell the May 30 contracts may not know that he should offer them at a higher price. So he offers them at the original price. And of course, everyone who's aware of this, everyone in the crowd would say, buy them. And so they'll buy the May 30s, and that allows them to sell more April 30s. So this is a kind of incomplete information. And so in a tangential way, it's related to bridge, where you have some information and your opponents have other information. And so there is a game being played there.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Hey, I'm looking at the time, and it's been fascinating to talk about bridge and the relationship and differences between being on the trading floor. I was just wondering, could you briefly take us, first of all, what's been the biggest learning experience when playing bridge or being on the trading floor?
The biggest learning experience. I'm sorry. You've daunted me for a moment. Do you mean something that is similar in both cases, or just different?
Just one of those. Is there something which sticks out? Oh, that for me was an aha moment. That's where I really learned something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me ignore bridge, because bridge is sort of a very it's a miniature, but trading. So the paper I did with Ave Neda on pinning, that came about because I actually experienced it firsthand and realized there must be a physical effect going on. And so for the physicists out in the audience, if you have any, basically there was a feedback mechanism going on, and I explicitly put that into the model. And what was really cool about that is we published the paper, and we had strong predictions about the asymptotic behavior of certain prices, and we didn't have any data to actually test that. But subsequently, teaching at Columbia and NYU for these years, I've had the students actually do the numerical experiments on the data sets that we have, and they've shown that our predictions were correct. So that was sort of fun. That was aha. Yeah, and another thing that was aha, during the internet bubble, I saw a lot of hard to borrow stocks. Those are stocks that if you tried to short them, you might be bought in. In other words, the clearing firm may force you to buy back stock at typically unfavorable prices. And so that was new to me, and it allowed me to think about the proper pricing for hard to borrows. And again, that was another nice paper with the Veyaneta. So
Okay.
that was good.
Now, with what you do,
Yeah.
um, where do you get your inspiration from? Is that people, books, painting?
Oh,
What
well,
inspires you?
it's from the whole collection of background learning. So it's not one thing. So, for example, uh, you haven't asked me about what I do currently for pastime and income, and that is I trade. Well, I alluded to this. I have taught a course called Event-Driven Finance,
Yeah.
and basically that's how prices move in response to news of various kind. So one of the things I do is I trade biotech events, and that's been a lot of fun. Um, Recently, with a student at NYU and a fellow colleague, we um, uh, published one and submitted two other papers, which are in consideration for publication, about some of the characteristics of earnings announcements. So companies are required to announce earnings 4 times a year, and in doing so, they alter the prices around the event, and so that's a lot of that insight has come from physically watching it and seeing what happens, but also a little bit of scaling theory that comes from the physics of phase transitions and so on.
And if I remember correctly, in preparing our discussions, not this is not only what you do, you also have bridge clients. You actually are
Oh,
being invited to come and play bridge around the States.
yeah. So I would not make a big deal of this. Bridge is a partnership game, like tennis
Yeah.
could be if you're playing doubles, and there there are good players at all levels. I mean, some are world class and some are less. So, like myself, who get hired to play in club games or in tournaments, so that the person hiring us can have a better experience. They get to play at a higher level. Um, it's a little hard to explain in bridge terms, but the equivalent would be if you and I decided we would play in a mixed doubles tournament,
Yeah.
and we're both tennis duffers, but I hire Serena Williams to play with me, and you hire Steffi Graf to play with you, and so of course. The net result would be that our collective play would be a lot better than it would be if just you and I were
Yeah.
playing tennis together.
Okay.
So.
Well, uh, great opportunity to see the world, I guess, or the States.
Oh, not for me. For people who are even, at a much higher level. Yeah, I have friends who are on their way to Poland in a few weeks to play in a European Championship with clients.
Yeah.
But I will go actually this year. I have a client who is taking me to the Maritime Regional, which is it rotates every year among the different maritime provinces of Canada. And this year, the tournament will be in Fredericton, New Brunswick.
Good. Are you um okay, last question. Are you relaxed when you been asked to play in a tournament like that, or do you get a little bit of tension? Like,
Um, Good tension, but not a lot of tension. I'm relatively relaxed.
okay,
Part of the reason for that is that typically the person who's hiring me to play with him is someone I've played with many times before. So there's not the tension of, will I remember what our agreements are in the bidding and so on. There's a little bit of tension, but that tension's good tension. It's sort of like, I guess if you've ever asked someone who's a professional actor, is there some tension going on stage, for a performance? Yes, but they feel quite comfortable in their abilities. It's just that, if you were too blasé, that wouldn't be good.
The right amount is needed. Final question. Any advice you want to give young people, young managers out there listening to us?
Yeah, I was very lucky. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I wanted to be able to do a lot of different things, and I've been able to do that. It's not necessarily a good idea to decide on a fiscal goal first. It might be better to decide on a intellectually comfortable and challenging area and pursue that. Of course, everyone has physical needs that require a certain degree of attention to financial planning. But I think if you're not going to be happy and you're going to do something for 30, 40 years, that's a really bad way to go through life if you can avoid it.
Yeah, good sound advice, Mike. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Lipkin, it was fascinating to talk to you about bridge, about trading, about your academic career. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your experience there, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.